Inside the mansion. The air grew heavier with each step they took, as if the very atmosphere inside the mansion was designed to oppress. Dr. Hale and Eva moved cautiously, the dim light casting long shadows against the decaying walls. The portraits that adorned the mansion's halls were unsettling, their painted eyes seeming to follow every move. It was as though the past inhabitants were watching them, judging their intrusion. Eva whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking wood beneath their feet. "This place feels wrong. Like it's alive. Like it's breathing." Dr. Hale didn't respond immediately, her attention focused on the narrow staircase ahead. They had passed through what appeared to be a main hallway, adorned with strange, occult symbols carved into the woodwork. She knew they were getting closer to whatever this place held. The muffled voices they had heard earlier were louder now, rising in a chant, an eerie melody that made Dr. Hale's skin prickle. Her heart raced, and she motioned for Eva to follow closely. They reached a set of double doors, behind which the chanting seemed to grow more intense. Dr. Hale hesitated for a moment, her mind running through the possibilities. Could they be ready for what lay beyond those doors? But there was no turning back now. She pushed the doors open. Inside the ritual chamber. The sight that greeted them was more grotesque than either of them had anticipated. The room was large, with high vaulted ceilings that seemed to stretch endlessly. Candles lined the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters in the dim light. In the center of the room stood a massive altar, covered in strange symbols and unholy artifacts. Around the altar were at least a dozen figures, all clad in black robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. The chanting they had heard earlier grew louder, more intense, and seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. At the head of the group stood Lucas. Dr. Hale's blood ran cold. She had expected him to be different, but this was something far more terrifying than she had imagined. Lucas stood tall, his figure illuminated by the candlelight, a serene yet unsettling smile playing on his lips. His eyes, however, were cold and empty, as if he were no longer fully human. Behind him, Ethan stood, his expression vacant. He had lost the spark of the person Miranda had described. Instead, his face was a mask of indifference, as though he had been hollowed out from the inside. Dr. Hale could barely breathe, but she knew they couldn't wait any longer. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "What is this? What have you done to Ethan?" Lucas turned toward them slowly, his smile widening in a way that made the hairs on the back of Dr. Hale's neck stand on end. "Ah, Dr. Hale. I've been expecting you." His voice was smooth, almost too calm, like he had all the time in the world to explain himself. "You've brought me everything I need, just as I knew you would." He gestured toward the altar, where Ethan stood, unmoving. "Ethan is mine now. And through him, I will unlock the next stage. He is the key to everything." Dr. Hale's heart pounded as she took in the scene before her. The others in the room were still chanting, their voices rising in a hypnotic crescendo. What was this ritual? What were they trying to summon? And why was Ethan at the center of it all? Eva, standing next to Dr. Hale, whispered urgently, "We need to stop this. We can't let them finish." "I know," Dr. Hale muttered. Her mind raced, searching for any way to disrupt what was happening. But before she could act, Lucas raised his hand, his eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't have come," Lucas said, his voice colder now. "But you're too late. The ritual is already in motion. There's no turning back." A clash of forces. As soon as Lucas spoke those words, the air in the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and a strange pressure filled the space, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The chanting grew louder, and Dr. Hale felt a pulse of energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Ethan!" Dr. Hale shouted, stepping forward. "This isn't you. You need to fight this." For a moment, Ethan's vacant eyes flickered, a hint of recognition crossing his face. But it was quickly replaced by an empty, distant stare as he took a step back, his body rigid, as if he were no longer in control of his own movements. Lucas smiled, a dark glint in his eyes. "Don't you see? Ethan is no longer the person you knew. He's awakened. He's transcended. He has joined us in the hollow circle. And now, you will witness the power that awaits him." Before Dr. Hale could react, one of the robed figures lunged at her, knocking her off balance. Eva shouted, grabbing Dr. Hale's arm to pull her back, but the attackers were too numerous. The ritual was intensifying, the room now vibrating with a low, unsettling hum. Dr. Hale struggled to break free, but another figure appeared before her, holding a long, ritualistic dagger. She knew in that moment that they were ready to do whatever it took to complete their dark ceremony. But what was the ceremony for? And what would happen once it was completed? Through the chaos, Dr. Hale caught a glimpse of Miranda standing at the edge of the room, her face pale with fear. She was watching helplessly, but there was something in her eyes that caught Dr. Hale's attention: determination. Miranda had to know something that could help them. "Miranda!" Dr. Hale cried, struggling against her attackers. "Help us! You have to stop this!" Miranda took a step forward, her hand trembling as she reached for something hidden beneath her robe. In one swift motion, she pulled out a small, intricately carved pendant. The moment the pendant came into view, the chanting faltered, and a wave of energy rippled through the room. Lucas's smile faltered as he turned toward Miranda, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. "You think that will stop me? Foolish girl." But Miranda stepped forward, holding the pendant aloft. "It's not just a trinket. This is what's kept Ethan from being fully taken by you. I may not know all the answers, but I know enough. This is what's keeping his soul anchored. And if you want him, you'll have to go through me first." The power in the room seemed to shift, a crackling energy rising between the two forces. Dr. Hale and Eva, momentarily freed from their attackers, watched in awe as the battle for Ethan's soul unfolded before them. The final confrontation. Lucas let out a low growl, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You're too late. Ethan belongs to me now." Miranda's voice rang out, stronger than before. "Not yet." She thrust the pendant forward, the energy from the stone glowing with an otherworldly light. The robed figures around them shrieked in pain, clutching at their heads as if they were being torn apart. The air shimmered with a blinding light, and for a moment, Dr. Hale thought she saw something impossible, a shadow, darker than night, reaching out from Ethan's body. "No!" Lucas shouted, his face contorting in rage. He raised his hands, and the ground beneath them trembled. But before Lucas could react, Ethan's body convulsed, his eyes flashing with something more than just emptiness. There was a flicker of humanity left in him, and it was enough. With a guttural scream, Ethan collapsed to the ground, shaking violently as the power in the room began to dissipate. Dr. Hale rushed to Ethan's side, her hands hovering over him as she checked for any signs of life. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Ethan's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he looked like himself. "Miranda," he whispered hoarsely, his voice weak but familiar. Miranda rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, you're back. You're back." Lucas, defeated and broken, staggered back, his face pale and twisted with fury. "This is not over," he hissed, his form flickering as if it were losing substance. "This world will never be free of us." Before anyone could respond, Lucas vanished into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of his threats. Aftermath. The mansion was quiet again, its dark secrets momentarily put to rest. Miranda and Ethan were free, but the weight of what had happened would haunt them forever. Dr. Hale and Eva, still recovering from the chaos, exchanged looks of disbelief. They had narrowly escaped the clutches of something far more sinister than they had imagined. But as the dust settled, one thing was clear: the hollow circle was not finished. It had only just begun. And they would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. The calm before the storm. The morning after the ritual was a blur. Dr. Hale and Eva sat in the small, dimly lit room they had claimed as their temporary base within the mansion. The light filtering through the grime-covered windows did little to lift the oppressive atmosphere that hung in the air. Even though the chaos had settled and Ethan had been freed, a sense of unease clung to them like a second skin. Ethan and Miranda were resting in another room, the reunion long overdue but bittersweet. While Ethan had returned to his normal self, the trauma of what had happened still left him vulnerable. His mind, even if his body had been freed from the dark possession, was not untouched by the horrors he had experienced. Dr. Hale leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as she tried to collect her thoughts. "We didn't just defeat Lucas," she muttered, "we just delayed the inevitable." Eva, who had been staring out of the window at the overgrown garden, turned to face her. "You think it's over? You really believe that?" Dr. Hale's expression hardened. "No. This is just the beginning. Whatever Lucas and the Hollow Circle were planning, they won't stop. Not now that they've tasted success." She paused, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "We don't even know the full extent of what they're capable of. The Hollow Circle is a force beyond anything I've encountered before." Eva nodded solemnly. "We need to find a way to break it. If they can summon that kind of power, we're in deeper trouble than we thought." Before Dr. Hale could respond, the sound of a door creaking open caught their attention. Miranda stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined. Ethan was behind her, his face drawn but focused. "We need to talk," Miranda said softly, stepping into the room. She closed the door behind her, casting a glance at the others. "There's something I didn't tell you. The hidden truth." Dr. Hale straightened in her chair, her interest piqued. "What is it?" Miranda hesitated, glancing at Ethan before turning her gaze back to Dr. Hale. Ethan wasn't the first one Lucas targeted. He wasn't even the first one to awaken. "What do you mean?" Eva asked, her voice tinged with concern. "There's more to this." Miranda nodded grimly. "The Hollow Circle has been around for centuries, hidden in plain sight. They've been using people as vessels, and not just anyone. Only those with a specific genetic connection can serve as the key to unlock their power. Ethan was just the most recent. But I'm not sure he was their intended target." Dr. Hale leaned forward, her curiosity growing. "Who was?" Miranda's voice trembled slightly. "Me." The revelation hit like a ton of bricks. Dr. Hale and Eva exchanged looks, their minds struggling to process the implications of what Miranda had just said. "I don't understand," Dr. Hale said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would they target you?" Miranda's eyes darkened. "Because I'm the bloodline. My family has been tied to the Hollow Circle for generations, and I had no idea. I've been running from it my whole life, trying to escape the pull, but it found me anyway." Eva shook her head, disbelief clouding her features. "You mean to say that Lucas, he was after you all along?" Miranda nodded slowly. "Yes. But when he realized I wasn't as easily manipulated as he thought, he shifted his focus to Ethan. He knew that if he could break Ethan, he could still gain access to the power he wanted. He wasn't trying to summon just any demon. He was looking for a way to breach the barrier between worlds, using the bloodline. And Ethan, unfortunately, was the key to that." The true nature of the Hollow Circle. Dr. Hale's mind raced as she absorbed the weight of Miranda's words. The Hollow Circle wasn't just a cult, it was something far older, a malignant force that had been operating under the radar of human history for centuries. And the truth behind its power was even more insidious than she had imagined. "What exactly do you mean by the barrier between worlds?" Dr. Hale asked, her voice tight with both urgency and fear. Miranda closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to continue. There's a world beyond our own. A realm where spirits and demons reside, where the laws of reality don't apply. The Hollow Circle has always sought a way to breach that realm, to pull its power into ours. By controlling people like me, who carry the bloodline, and by using them as a vessel, they can open a rift. But they've never been able to break through. Not until now. Dr. Hale's heart sank. So the ritual we stopped, that was just the first attempt? Miranda nodded somberly. The first attempt that failed. But there's more to it. They have other rituals planned, more powerful than the one they tried to use on Ethan. And each time they fail, they grow stronger. They learn from their mistakes. Eva clenched her fists. How do we stop them? If they're trying to tear through the fabric of reality itself, there has to be a way to close it. Miranda's eyes met Dr. Hale's. The only way to stop them is to sever the connection. The bloodline, the key, it's all linked to one place. The Hollow Circle's power is rooted in the ruins of an ancient temple, buried deep beneath the mansion. Dr. Hale's mind raced. So that's where we need to go. The heart of their power. But what exactly do we need to do once we're there? Miranda shook her head. I don't know. But the truth is, it's not just the Hollow Circle we need to worry about. The creatures they're trying to bring through aren't just demons, they're ancient, primal beings. Ones that have been locked away for a reason. If they succeed in tearing the barrier wide enough, it could be the end of everything we know. The descent into darkness. With a new sense of urgency, the group began to prepare for their next move. They knew that confronting the Hollow Circle would be far more dangerous than anything they had encountered so far. It wasn't just about saving Ethan or Miranda anymore, it was about stopping an apocalyptic event from unfolding. They made their way to the depths of the mansion, where the ancient temple lay hidden beneath layers of forgotten history. As they descended, the air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The further they went, the more the darkness seemed to press in on them, as if the mansion itself was a living, breathing entity, guiding them toward their doom. Ethan, though still recovering from the ordeal, insisted on being part of the mission. His voice, though weak, carried a conviction that none of the others could ignore. I've come this far, he said. I can't let it all end now. We need to finish this. Miranda nodded in agreement. We'll face whatever's waiting for us down there, together. As they reached the final chamber, they found themselves standing before a massive, ancient stone door. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, glowing with an eerie light. This is it, Dr. Hale said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The heart of the Hollow Circle. Whatever happens next, we face it head-on. They gathered their strength and pushed the door open, knowing that beyond it lay not just the key to their survival, but also the ultimate battle against a force that could very well tear their world apart.